If you've ever been to a Portuguese bakery, then I bet you any money you saw these there. Pasteis De Nata, that classic Portuguese custard tart everyone loves. And in this video, I'm going to take you step by step on how to make authentic bakery style Pasteis De Nata at home. It can be done, because buying them in the bakery can get pretty pricey, yet making them is quite easy. First thing you'll want to do is preheat your oven as high as it'll go, at least 500 degrees Fahrenheit. The experts say you have to let it heat up for 1 hour, but I find 30 minutes to be sufficient, at least with my oven. Here I have 300 grams of puff pastry. I'm going to sprinkle a little flour on my surface and on the pastry itself, and I'm going to roll this into a rectangle. This is the puff pastry recipe that appears on this channel, and if you're interested in that, I've linked it in the description below. You're only going to need half a batch. Now, if you don't want to make your own puff pastry, not to worry. Any good store-bought puff pastry will do. As long as you have roughly 300 grams, you're good to go. When you're rolling this, you'll want to keep the corners as square as you can, because then your portions will be more even, and you're going for a rectangle that's roughly 12 by 8 inches. Starting with the long side, roll this into a log, as if you were making a jelly roll. And you want to make this roll as tight as you can, and how many pieces you cut it into will depend on how many tarts you want to make. If you're using individual molds for Pasteis De Nata and you have more than 12, then 14 will be the ideal number you can get out of this. But because the pan I'm using today only has 12 wells in it, I'm going to be getting 12 tarts, which is fine by me, I guess. Do be sure that you use a pan that's either stainless steel or aluminum. You don't want to be using anything with a fancy Teflon coating on it. We're going to be cooking this at a pretty high temperature, and that deems it unsafe. So sprinkle a little flour on the surface, and with the cut side facing up, roll this into a circle that measures roughly 5 inches in diameter. If you're using the individual molds, you should be able to just press the dough in. Using a bench scraper is really helpful here. So you want to take your circle and start lining each cup with the pastry. Now, I don't know what kind of molds you're going to be using, but I do know that with this pan I have to leave at least ½ inch overhang of dough. I already know from experience that if I don't make my shells high enough, I won't be able to use up all of my custard. So go ahead and do that to all the rest of the dough pieces, and if you're enjoying this video and you like my recipes, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button along with that notification bell. That way you'll never miss a recipe, and it's free, so why not? Once all your pastry is lined in your pan, you want to put this in the fridge to chill, and then we're going to make the custard. So in a saucepan over medium heat, combine 1 cup of whole milk and 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Whisk this constantly and let it come to a boil, but you don't want to abandon this for any length of time, because if it does cook unattended and gets all clumpy, it's very difficult to whisk smooth again. I've made literally hundreds of Pasteis De Nata when I used to work in a bakery, and I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. So as soon as your mixture looks thick and pudding-like you see here, you can take it off the heat, and now we're going to add in 4 egg yolks. So go ahead and separate your eggs, and hopefully you're going to save those whites for another recipe. But I usually drop those egg yolks right back into the same measuring cup that I use to measure the milk. I don't know about you, but I hate washing dishes. Therefore, the less I have to use, the better. Now we're going to take some of that hot milk mixture and add it slowly to the egg yolks, about a tablespoon at a time. We're only going to do this a couple of times, and this is called tempering. What we're trying to do here is slowly bring up the temperature of those yolks so that when we add it back into the pot, they don't become scrambled eggs. That way we have a nice smooth custard. So go ahead and add it all back into the pot and whisk it together until it's all nice and smooth, just like you see here. Now in order to sweeten this, we have to make a simple syrup. So in a small saucepan, you combine 3/4 cup of sugar, 1/4 cup of water, and ½ a teaspoon of salt. It's best not to stir this at all, because then that will encourage crystallization, and that won't be any good. So let this come to a simmer over medium heat, and you want to cook this until it reaches 212 degrees Fahrenheit on a candy thermometer. But because I've made these so many times, I've learned that letting it cook on the lower end of medium like this for exactly 3 minutes gives you the right temperature, and they always turn out. So after 3 minutes of simmering, you can take it off the heat, and now you can add this simple syrup into your custard. Whisk that together until it's nice and smooth, and do be sure to get down into the corners of the pot, because I find that the pudding kind of hides out in there, and then you don't end up with a nice smooth mixture. Don't be alarmed if your pudding looks really thin, that's how it should be. And finally, we're going to add a teaspoon of vanilla. Whisk that right in there, and do be sure to let this cool completely before pouring it into your puff pastry shells, which I'll remind you should be very well chilled. Always remember a good rule of thumb with puff pastry, it's cold dough, hot oven. That's why it's so important for your custard to be cooled completely before filling the shells. If the butter in your pastry melts, then it's not going to puff up nicely and you're going to have more of a chewy dough. And nobody likes that. You should have just enough custard to generously fill each and every cup, and hopefully by now your oven is blazing hot. So we're going to bake these for about 18 to 22 minutes, and this is what they're going to look like. And I will admit that my oven could have used a few more minutes of preheating time, but these still turned out excellent. The custard will puff up slightly, but it will drop again, and in a few minutes they will very easily pop out of the molds. And if you're having a hard time getting that authentic blistery looking top, don't be afraid to pop these under the broiler so that you can get it a little bit charred. Be warned that it does happen quickly, so keep an eye on them. Some people like to sprinkle a little cinnamon on top, but I like them plain. And I don't want to be rude, but listen to this. You've gotta love that brittle crunch of the puff pastry, and the middle is so creamy and sweet. Once you whip up a batch of these and realize how easy they actually are to make, you may never buy them from a bakery again.